PvP in most MMOs sucks. Yeah, I said it. Before you go clicking off this video or typing that angry comment though, I ask that you watch the full video and hear me out. When I say PvP sucks in most MMOs, I'm not saying all PvP always sucks. What I mean is that most MMOs, including ones that focus on PvP, make a lot of mistakes when designing these systems that hurt the game's overall experience. Which is a real shame because if done right, PvP can actually offer some of the most enjoyable gameplay experiences in the genre. Also, don't get me wrong, I thoroughly enjoy PvP in other genres. There's nothing quite like the rush you get from defeating a skilled opponent or 360 no-scoping your buddy Kyle. Ha! Get Kyle. So if PvP is generally so much fun, why is it that in MMOs it always feels so lackluster? Well, I would say there are 5 main reasons for this. 1. Pay-to-win mechanics. 2. The PvP feels meaningless. 3. Improper implementation that drives away PvE players. 4. Zerging, and 5. Class balance. There are of course other elements to consider, and a lot of this will be subject to personal taste, but these 5 are the main things that hold PvP back in my experience. These issues apply to so many different games that it would be impossible to touch on them all, especially because in a lot of cases the problems are only temporary due to updates and shifting metas. So instead, I'm going to be addressing things more generally and discussing how the upcoming game Ashes of Creation plans to solve these issues. Big disclaimer though, as of writing, Ashes of Creation is currently in alpha, so everything mentioned is subject to change, and the solutions here may or may not make it into the final game. So with that out of the way, let's get into the first and fastest point, which is pay-to-win mechanics. You hate it, I hate it, everybody hates it. Nothing kills a game's PvP scene quite like giving a direct advantage to people who spend more money on the game. As soon as you provide an advantage to paying players, you effectively throw every other combat mechanic out a window, turning the game from a test of skill to a test of wallet size. Mobile MMOs are notorious for this, where swiping your credit card becomes a competitive sport, right up until you run out of money to feed your kids with. As a developer, this will almost certainly provide short-term profit, but those whales who spend heaps of money to dominate the game will get bored real fast once everyone else gets sick of it and quits the game. The solution to this one is just crazy. Stop making your games pay to win! God damn it! Okay, I'm back. The thing about pay to win is there are just so many better ways to monetize your games. Ashes of Creation, for example, plans to follow a similar monetization system to a little known MMO called World of Warcraft. You've probably never heard of WoW before since it's such a small game, but the model they use is a monthly subscription fee with optional paid cosmetics. I really appreciate this approach. Though Ashes of Creation has been using fear of missing out to help sell these pre-order packs, I don't really approve of this, but that one's a discussion for another day. Back on the topic of PvP, the next point here is actually one of the main things that inspired me to create this video in the first place. In many MMOs, the PvP just doesn't really matter. You will mainly see this in theme park MMOs where the PvP experience is completely removed from the rest of the game's content. With this type of system, you will generally have a separate arena or PvP area to go and fight people, but beyond this, the rewards you get there are pretty much only useful in that isolated PvP environment. This creates a scenario where PvP feels lifeless because the only thing you're really fighting for is just a spot on the leaderboards. When it comes to this kind of implementation, it feels more like it was added to check another box and not because it really adds anything to the game as a whole. On top of this, it splits your player base in half because more often than not, players will just focus on either the PvE or PvP experience rather than enjoying both. So how do you make a PvP system actually meaningful to your overall game? Well, the way Ashes plans to address this is by weaving the PvP and PvE experiences together in a really interesting way. The game will feature all the PvP modes listed on screen now. These are all meaningful in their own ways, but for the sake of time, we really only need to discuss one of these for this section of the video: node sieges. With node sieges, Ashes of Creation has these nodes that make up a large amount of the game's content. I won't go into too much detail on these in this video, but there are a few main things you need to know. Most of the content in this game is tied to these nodes that are scattered across the world, and these can be leveled up from a small encampment to a huge metropolis, thus unlocking more content for a given area. A node's level is tied to the surrounding nodes, and there can only be up to 5 metropolises on a given server, so that's where node sieges come into play. Because of the way these nodes shape the world around them, this means that PvP content has a major, direct impact on just about everything else in the game world. You will need to band together to defend your home and destroy other nodes to further the goals of your allies. This creates a system that not only makes PvP meaningful, but also encourages PvE players to get into this aspect of the game. Everyone will want to participate to help protect the things they worked so hard for, as well as unlock more PvE content for them to do. Which actually brings me to the next problem I have with a lot of MMO PvP systems: improper PvP implementation that drives away PvE players. You find this a lot in MMOs that have a heavier emphasis on PvP, and the main way this presents itself is in open world PvP. This point will be pretty controversial, but I think open world PvP needs to be carefully thought out rather than just thrown in. What happens too often is that the PvP players gang up and grief PvE players, ruining their experience of the game, effectively alienating half of that game's player base. On the other side of this coin though, open world PvP has the opportunity to feel really engaging, especially with systems that balance risk and reward. The way Ashes of Creation plans to implement this is it will allow open world PvP, but players will need to be careful as there is a corruption system in place to prevent griefing. The way this works is that if a player flags for PvP and then kills a player who isn't flagged and doesn't fight back, the attacking player becomes corrupted. On screen now will be a visual guide for how this system will work in more detail. There's a little too much to cover all in this one video, but the important part here is that there are significant penalties placed on corrupted players. You can, however, steal gatherable materials from others by killing them. This creates a unique dynamic where open world PvP is rewarded in some ways, while being harshly punished in others, including corrupted players receiving a stacking debuff that reduces their PvP effectiveness. The other way this is punished is through a bounty hunting system. See, players will be given the opportunity to become bounty hunters and will receive the ability to hunt down and kill corrupted players. This means you can't just go around killing whomever you please, because not only will you incur significant penalties, but other PvP inclined players will be given the tools and incentives to relentlessly hunt you down. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they implement this, and has been a very heavily debated issue. On the one hand, I think this system sounds awesome in theory, but it will need to be balanced very carefully to avoid either punishing players too harshly or not harshly enough. I also feel like this is a good place to mention, with this game they are trying to create a true PvX environment. They have tons of systems in place for PvE players to enjoy the game, and even include ways for PvE players to participate in PvP without actually fighting other players, but you likely won't be able to avoid PvP entirely. However, as I just mentioned, there are loads of ways for PvE players to indirectly participate in PvP, such as crafting gear and siege weapons for the more PvP-inclined players. Despite these systems though, if you're a player who just completely loathes the idea of PvP, it has yet to be seen just how accommodating this game will actually be for that type of player. I'm really curious to know how well you think these systems will balance this, so be sure to comment down below your thoughts on this one. Especially if you're more of a PvE inclined player, I would love to hear what you think. Now on to the next thing that I believe ruins PvP in MMOs. We have Zerging. Now this one is a rather tricky issue and many players won't even think it's a problem, but to those players I would ask you this: what's more fun, two unholy writhing masses of players lobbing AoEs at each other until the bigger group wins? Or an epic back and forth war of tactics and strategy leading to a battlefield covered in chaotic individual fights, where each player's skill and tactics matter more than just raw numbers? But in such a massive game with so many players in a given conflict, how do you prevent Zerging and keep the combat more engaging? Well, the Intrepid team are very aware of this issue and plan to combat it in PvP in two major ways: political intrigue and objective-based gameplay. Starting with political intrigue, there's very little information on how this will be implemented. What we do know, however, is there will be opportunities for backstabbing and putting systems in place that allow for drama to organically form within large groups. One way this will present itself is in castle sieges, where guilds may work together to reach the throne room, but once there, only one can actually rule. Meaning, hypothetically, someone could betray their alliance and take the throne for themselves. The other way they plan to break up Zergs is objective-based game design. I personally got to take part in alpha testing for castle sieges, which was so much fun by the way. But in castle sieges, they have multiple objectives to go after, making grouping up in one big Zerg a bad strategy. First, they have these dragon raid bosses which provide significant buffs to the side that defeats them. Then, they have several teleport points that are only accessible to the team that has control of them. And finally, there are multiple ways to approach a castle, and with siege weapons having large AoEs, you're going to want to make a bit of distance between you and your friends or risk getting wiped out all at once. And for the last topic for today's video, class balance and stunlock mechanics. Don't you guys just love it when combat becomes nothing more than a battle of who can stun the other person first? And who doesn't love it when one class is so broken that they dominate the meta for years on end, Black Desert Online, to a point where everyone just plays the same class, Suck Wizard, because it's just that much better than everything else. I sure can't think of any specific examples for this one. So for Ashes, this causes a rather interesting problem. You see, there are 8 main archetypes, and you can combine one primary and one secondary to create your class. This creates a small handful of, psych, 64 class combinations. So what you're probably wondering is how in the holy sandals do you balance 64 class combos? Well, I'll tell you how. You don't. Instead, everything is balanced around 8 core archetypes in both their specific skills and how they augment other classes when used as a secondary. To simplify this even further, the plan is to balance these in a sort of rock, paper, scissors style system, where each class has matchups that will almost always win and matchups that will almost always lose. While this will make one-on-one PvP a little bit less fair, this system should lead to group and larger scale PvP being much more diverse. No one class can shine too far above the rest because should that happen, the classes that counter it suddenly become the new meta pick, thus rebalancing things again. And as for stunlocks, Ashes has a plan for that too. The solution to this one is a simple system of diminishing returns. The more you get stunned, the greater resistance you gain to the next one until eventually you just don't get stunned anymore. I kind of wish I had this system of diminishing returns on my own personal stuns, because every time someone likes a video and subscribes to this channel, I'm stunned every time. All jokes aside though, if you're looking for a more detailed breakdown of all the different PvP modes available, there will be a link in the description down below to Ashes 101. Ashes 101 is a great site by fellow content creator Jalan, full of detailed information about all sorts of systems in Ashes, so be sure to check that out if you're interested. So those are some of my thoughts on PvP and the MMO genre. Be sure to let me know what you think in the comment section down below. If you liked the video, make sure to hit like. If you want to see more, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!